Hi everyone. So today we are going to analyze very deeply the book High Output Management by. I really loved the book and it has a rating of 4.3 on Goodreads. So we'll try and cover the most important things that I found in the book, and so that you don't have to go through the entire book again and you can just brush through and get the important concepts. So let's begin. So we'll first start with meetings, then we'll talk about decision making. Okay, so at that level, how do you take decisions, how things go along, and typically how do you do an appraisal? What are the things that you should keep in mind, and what are the two important tasks of people management, that is interviewing new guys into your team and preventing people from quitting, and finally talking about training, which is very important for any manager. So let's begin. First, we'll talk about meetings. Okay. So meetings here, what I have done is I have also included one snapshot from one of my earlier videos where I had covered a framework for meetings that is typically followed in McKinsey, which basically talks about that there are four different types of meetings that are possible. So one is a typical update meeting, which is you just meet to share an update. Then there are kind of escalation meetings, you have problem solving meetings, and you have the typical knowledge sharing and idea generation or the brainstorming meeting. So these are some of the type of meetings that you have. Now typically you can also classify meetings in three different categories. So one is large town hall type meetings where a lot of people, maybe your entire department, your entire organization, gather together and you kind of have an information exchange. The senior management gives you an update of what is happening where, etc. Then you have one-to-one meetings, which typically consists of your reviews, appraisals, continuous appraisal sessions, feedback sessions with your team members. And then you have these operation review meetings wherein the senior management gives an update, a review is done for the management team by the top management. Okay. So let's cover each of them one by one. So as I already mentioned that this is more of an information exchange where you have these large town hall type meetings. Okay, you get the pulse of the meeting and the culture. So if you want to understand the culture of an organization, this is probably the best place to be, and you can understand it very quickly. Okay, then moving on to the second type and the most common and the most important one is the one-to-one meetings that you have. I'm not talking about the random uh, meets that you have with your subordinates. I'm talking about the ones that are pre-scheduled and are documented also, and kind of important meeting. I have heard a lot of managers, they say that even the subordinate, they say that we don't need any of pre-scheduled meets or any structured approach. My manager is very accessible and I can contact him any moment. Please be aware this is not the right way. An informal meeting can never be as good as a formal meeting. So I strongly recommend that if you are a manager or if you are a subordinate, please ensure that you guys get into a formal one-to-one meeting, because that's where the real magic happens. You actually understand what the other person or the other team member is going through, what your boss thinks about you, and if you are the boss, you will exactly know what he prioritizes, what he or she wants, and you can also control attrition if this is done well. So I've covered a few points, like you should ask the subordinates to prepare and outline the points before coming to the meeting. So I'm sure they must be having a lot of things to discuss. You as a manager, your job would typically be to ask the right kind of questions to evaluate their proposal. Let's say you have given them a task and they are supposed to revert to you with a go no go decision. So as a manager, you have to ask the right kind of questions so that you can evaluate how they think, how they work their solutions out, and then it will be much easier for you to give a go ahead. So this is one of the finest leverage that you can make use of as a manager, wherein you are delegating decision making to your subordinates and at the same time saving your time, also preparing them for the next upskill and for the next level. So this is very important. Finally, moving on to the next step, wherein you now often what happens is, as a manager, I get a lot of requests from my team members wherein they want my time. They keep pinging me, they keep calling me, and if I start attending all the calls, I will go crazy. It's not practically possible to be at the beck and call of your team members. typically what happens is you can ask your team members or the subordinates to have a sheet wherein they can start punching in all the topics that they want to discuss with you. And so, you can also have some columns such as what is the issue. They will have a brief description. What is the date by when they want it resolved? What is the priority according to them? Is there any dependency on any other team or any other person? What are the typical discussion areas? So there you can give a drop down where they can select that it's a potential problem, it's an initiative, it's some reactive work, or it's some other urgency that has come up. So what basically happens is it will be very easy for you to prioritize your time, and your subordinates will have to think and give their mind share before coming to you. So only if the problem is really serious, if the problem really needs some thinking, he will take this step. Otherwise, he will avoid. So I personally feel that this is very important and can actually help you prioritize a lot of tasks. Often what happens is once the subordinate starts writing in, he himself will realize that this is the problem. And in fact, there is one more thing you can do. You can also add one column wherein you can say what is your suggested solution. So that is when you start forcing the subordinate to come up with a solution. Like Brian Tracy always says in his book Delegation and Supervision, he says that you should always gather the solution from the subordinate himself first. Keep asking him the right questions. Okay, so suppose he comes up with something, ask him, okay, what else, what else, what else, what else do you think can be done? So that forces him to think hard, and you will see that actually you will get down to the crux of the problem and also start getting in solutions in that discussion itself. Finally, this batched way of settling issues increases efficiency, as I already covered, not only for you but also for the subordinates. Moving on to the third type of meeting, which is operations review. This is typically a shared template is shared with the team members, typically by the top management to the senior managers of a department, and the senior managers then kind of prepare all the points on which they are to be reviewed. And so I would say typically what happens is there's a 60% of a review and 40% of an update, which that is what happens. You can also give in your suggestions and start noting them down if you really want them implemented. Okay, so moving on, let's see. Okay, so what are the points that you should remember if you are organizing a meeting? So always remember that please have a very clear agenda. As a subordinate, I have experienced this. This is the biggest demotivator when you don't know why you are going to a meeting. Always have planned meetings. Avoid random meetings unless and until it's an emergency or a house burning situation. Always have planned meetings. This, I cannot emphasize this enough, because this is one thing which damages the motivation level of employees. Okay, in one of my previous organizations, there was a CTO. She was very unorganized and she used to have random meetings 4 5 times a day. The result was such that the attrition rate shot up to almost 50%, and the company could not survive. So I would say the sole factor was that, and hence I would request all the managers to try and have as many planned meetings as possible. And I mean, of the meetings that you have, try to maximize the meetings as planned meetings only. Okay, have dedicated documents to be reviewed and shared previously rather than discussing them during the meet. This saves a lot of time for you and for your team members. Also, there is one thing that I have seen, that if there are people coming to a meeting very late, so unless and until you make them realize that this is a sin, they will not rectify themselves. Start highlighting, start pointing them out so that they understand that not only are they wasting their own time, they have wasted other people's time as well, because other people would have to reiterate and repeat some of the things. So this should not be tolerated at any cost. If required, if you want, you can also go to an extreme wherein you can kind of, one to one talk to that person and tell him that there is a cost attached when, say, 7 8 people are coming for a scrum meeting. So if you are being late, you are actually costing us money. Okay, moving on. As I said, discipline is very crucial in this. It sets the tone right. And trust me, once you set it right, it will be far more easier and your subordinates will respect you even more. Your role as a supervisor is to lead, observe, expedite, question, and facilitate decision, but not lecture. I have often seen that some of the poor managers that we have, what happens is they start lecturing on, okay, this is what you should do, this is what you should not do. No. As a supervisor, your job ideally should be to elicit a decision or what the team is going to do. It should be like you should convince them in such a manner that they would want to do what you want done. That's the power of supervisor. Okay, so they themselves should be convinced that okay, this is what we are going to do, and that's when results will play out. So I have also taken a snapshot from the book wherein I mentioned this, that the real sign of malorganization is when people spend more than 25% of their time in ad hoc mission oriented meetings. Okay, so moving on. Okay, there is a template for minutes of meeting, which is typically this, which basically you have the subject, you have the meeting number, if you are tracking that, date, schedule, start time. Okay, if you want to track in detail, you might as well do this. Then who are the people who attended? Sometimes I've also seen that some people also mark the absentees. So, but remember this DART method, when what decision was taken, what are the action points, whose responsibility is it, and what is the target date of closing. So DART method of meeting is what I say. And here what we are basically capturing is the supervisor to keep meetings on track while subordinates work out the solution. So what happens is when your subordinate and the supervisor both are inactive, then basically the entire team is snoring. Once the supervisor is active and the team members are inactive, or they are a little lackadaisical, what happens is the supervisors will bring them into an active mode. Once they come into an active mode, then the supervisor should start getting on to an inactive mode and just be an observer. You will see that things will start flowing automatically as in a scrum meeting. So discussions would be on track, and if both the supervisor and the team members are all super active, then also the discussions will go off track, as there will be a lot of discussions which are not relevant to the project. So be mindful that as a supervisor, your job is to wake them up from their slumber, and once they wake up, you kind of go to sleep. Okay, moving on. The next topic is decision making. So decision making, basically what happens is free discussions should happen always before you come to a decision. Okay, clear decision is a result, and each and everyone should be in agreement. It has to have the support of the entire team. So this is the same DART framework that I had shown earlier: decisions taken, action points, responsibility, and target. Any decision is reached at the lowest expertise level of competence. So you might be a project manager, senior project manager, but you might not be as an expert on technical stuff as your tech lead. So let the tech lead take the decisions, but you ask the right kind of questions so as to ensure that you guys are on the right path. Okay, now there is also a balance between knowledge power people, okay, and the position power people. So for example, your tech lead might be very high in the knowledge power people axis, while you, being his manager, would be higher on the position power matrix. So let's say as a manager, you are here where your knowledge is low, knowledge being on the x-axis, position being on the y-axis. You are here. Your tech lead is somewhere here. Okay, he might not, or maybe here. His position is not as high as yours, but his knowledge is far more than yours. Okay, avoid this because there are some freshers who might try and influence you. Try and avoid, because it's a little risky when you listen to them and implement a solution based on their suggestions. So of course, listen to them openly, freely, let them express. But if you have to take any important decision, then ensure that the group does not consist of more than 6 people. Otherwise, it's very easy for the discussion to go astray. Important decisions should never be taken by an individual, but always in a group, especially if it affects a large number of people. Okay, moving on, coming to an important topic of appraisals, potential problems, what they see for their career, etc. So when you have the discussions, you must have this in mind, have an holistic view. some of the points that you should always remember during appraisals, when you are doing appraisals for your subordinates, is always give specific reviews, consistency in your words and feedback, you know, and also give an indication on how to improve. Don't give a very generic kind of a feedback. Tell them specifically what you want, how you think they could improve. Of course, don't avoid negatives. If you are someone like me, it's actually a little difficult to talk about negatives. Then probably what you can do is you can write it down, make a note, and share it with him earlier. And then during your appraisal discussion, you can have a one-to-one elaborate discussion with him on those points. So you can have a SWOT analysis and share it with him. It will again add a lot of value for both of you and make the discussion far more effective. As a supervisor, know what he does or doesn't do. Sometimes what happens is, like, the subordinate should not get this feeling that my manager doesn't even know what am I doing. So it is a very big demotivator for him. Avoid that. Also try and avoid the recency effect or the primacy effect. So recency effect is only highlighting what he has done recently. Of course, always avoid surprises in appraisal. So if you have to give a feedback, a very negative feedback, try and do that throughout. It should not be that, after 6 months or 1 year, he suddenly gets to know a very basic behavioral problem in an appraisal. That's not the right way. And if you see this matrix here, it says truth on the x-axis and care on the y-axis. So basically what this says is the best way is to say the truth, but always with good amount of care. That's when your feedback would be taken up. Okay, if you're saying the truth but not with care, this is one of the most common things that I have seen managers do. Then the feedback would not be taken up. This would also lead to some sort of an attrition probably. And this is like, giving a piece of cake to someone without sugar. So he's not going to enjoy the cake. So always convey your message truthfully and with care as well. Okay. Okay. So next point of appraisal is, so what I've done here is, so Chris Croft, there was an article by Chris Croft where he mentions about the motivation level of an employee and the capability or the competence that he has. So of course, these two parameters are very important. An employee is going to stay with you and work really well when he's both motivated and is competent. So when the freshers join in, so freshers would be high on motivation but low on competence. So they would typically be, somewhere here. While an experienced guy who knows it all but hasn't been promoted in some time for whatever reason, or is not happy with his salary, would have a low motivation but would have high competency. So all you should try is, we should have max number of people here. And for the freshers, they might be here because they have high motivation level, they have joined in. So ensure that the freshers move from this quadrant to this quadrant rather than going back here or moving here, wherein they learn a lot of things, but their motivation level goes down. For an inefficient people, if for inefficient person, it might be possible that he moves from this quadrant to this quadrant, wherein time passes on, but he doesn't learn as much. Then you might have to think of PIP or some sort of a program like this. Okay. Then there is also some sort of a skill will matrix that you can prepare for some of your subordinates, which basically, talks about what is your understanding, or you can ask him to share it with you. That, for example, this subordinate does not like doing pre-sales estimations. However, he loves, client handling, escalations management, etc. So this is his will and his skill. He's good at it and he wants to do it. So basically this means that though he's skilled at it, he is not really keen to do it. So resource related development programs, sales activities, etc. This means he wants to do it, but is not really highly skilled at it. Okay. Okay. So moving on to the other points, look at both the tangible and the intangible aspects. Okay. Now there may be a case wherein you are doing an appraisal and the person has had a fabulous year. So that is what Mr. Groove talks about. He may have had a wonderful year, but you must note that whether the people are also happy, or it's that he has applied a lot of pressure and the people have somehow delivered, but they are not happy and the attrition rate is going to shoot up. So take note before judging and giving an appraisal. If 1 year is extraordinarily good, be more careful that the next year might not be good. Okay. There is also a concept of regression to the mean, so which basically talks about whenever there is an extraordinary year, whether it's good or bad, there's a likely higher possibility that it would revert to the mean next year. So be careful of that and just see if there has been any radical change, any positive change that has been done, and otherwise it has only been done with a lot of pressure, which is definitely not good for the long run. Now, when you are reviewing a manager, you are reviewing his performance and his teams as well. Now, there are times when hear this, I did well, but my team didn't do well. So don't accept that. A manager is only as good as his team. Okay. So avoid the high potential trap for a manager. Here, Mr. Groove talks about is sometimes we get confused, as in we say that, okay, though he hasn't done well, but he has a lot of potential. You don't mark him on potential, you mark him on what he has already delivered. Remember that. Okay. Then he also talks about three things that we as supervisors should take care of. So be at the same level, that is, be totally frank. Let him open up absolutely without being judgmental. Then you have to listen to him. Be ready to listen to him. Don't record. I've seen, there are people who start, okay, I'll be recording. He will not open up if you start recording. Listen hard, and communication is really, really very critical here. Okay. And finally, the third point is leave yourself out. Let him do the talking and don't interrupt. Don't judge. Okay. Moving on. Okay. Now, poor candidate supposedly going in PIP. So this is also a possibility. Now, when you are having a discussion with him, so there are a few stages that he recommends. He says that first of all, if there is a poor performance, so the person would often say that no, he doesn't even know about it. So he has been ignoring it, maybe passively. He doesn't know it, but he has been ignoring it. There's another possibility where he says that no, this is not something that I have done. So he denies doing it. Then the third stage is where he blames others, but at least the good part is that he accepts that there has been something wrong. The fourth stage is where he assumes responsibility. He accepts that it was done because of him. And finally, the fifth or the higher stage is where he gives an effort to find solutions. Okay. And as we discussed earlier, also, is always give a written review before face-to-face discussion for the subordinate so that he's better prepared during the meet. Now, this is a progression plan of a manager. So as a manager, what you can probably do is you can list down the resources that you have and where do you see each of them. So for example, one of them is in, kind of a learner or a fresher. Then you gradually move him on to a junior developer, senior developer, an independent worker, an internal guide for others, finally a tech lead and someone fit to be a project manager or a senior manager, including client management, etc. So that is how you can kind of plan your progression for the developers. This is for you. If you want, you may share it with them. Okay. Finally, coming to an important aspect of manager, which is interviewing. So here, what as a manager you need to do is that first of all, when you have an interview, let the applicant do 80% of the talking. You talk as less as possible because you want to know him. You want to see whether there's a fit between your organization and him. Check references, though it might not be true. So this is a little bit of a gamble, definitely. Then he also talks about that the interview time is yours. Control the guy to speak as much as required. And you can also steer the direction of the interview as you deem fit. Don't, if there's a garrulous person or if there's someone who is nervous, he would end up talking a bit too much. So you take control and ensure that you steer it the way you want. Okay. Then use words like I would like to change the subject to XYZ, whatever. Try to steer the discussion, as I already said. Look for problem solving capacity and if possible, give assignments to judge the same. Now, there could be a possibility that if you are hiring someone for a role, he might not be a perfect fit, but you feel that, yes, there is a lot of potential. What we discussed earlier in appraisals, contrary to that, here you may recruit someone based on potential. Okay. Now, there are certain questions that Andrew had suggested. So I have given a screenshot of that. Okay. So let's say, what are your weaknesses? How are you working to eliminate them? Convince me why my company should hire you, etc. These are some of the questions that you may ask. Okay, moving on. So the final thing is that sometimes, an employee suddenly comes up and says that he wants to quit. So if he's quitting for monetary matters or for a higher post, it's a little difficult, and it's a little more, it's not as easy to retain him. However, there may be times when he has quit because he doesn't feel important. He's not being given the right kind of uh, role, or he's not getting the freedom he wants. So this is far more dominant than the monetary matters. So what you can do is you can try and save the employee even if it requires you to transfer him to some other team, but at least you will be able to keep him in the same company. And what happens is once this culture sets up, you will also start getting in such people from other team members. So take the initiative, do it as a favor to one of your peer managers, and trust me, it will start coming back to you as well. Here, compensation is also as a tool wherein often they would say that they want to hike, and that's why they quit. So you must understand here there are two reasons. So one is an absolute hike. Now you have to judge whether an absolute hike matters for him. So for freshers and people who have just started in their career, absolute hike definitely matters. They are not so much in with the relative hike game because they are still satisfying their physiological needs in the Maslow's hierarchy pyramid, if you know that. Okay. And secondly, when you become a mid-level manager, then typically it's a feeling of self-worth which is associated with your salary and the compensation, not necessarily that you actually need that amount of money. So be very careful with this. And so often what some people do is, as when you're doing an appraisal for a mid-level manager, what you can probably also do is give him a higher variable percentage. So the variable pay would form a major chunk of his annual package. Okay. The relative compensation is often linked with self-worth. Finally, coming to training, training is again very important, and it often says that that it is one of the primary duties of a boss, and okay, of the four leverage factors. Okay, so let me explain this. That what do I mean by the leverage factors? Now, as you move up the ladder, whether you are in any kind of a business or some sort of a high position, job, you are a director, a senior vice president. There are four types of leverage that you use. So one is labor, which is labor force. Second is capital or money investments. Third is media or branding or marketing. And finally, the fourth is automation, coding, and the power of IT. So these four leverages can help you scale up massively. And this is what determines your USP in the market. So let me explain. In case you are an IT organization, okay, here the developers form a major component of the labor force and form an important leverage uh, parameter. Okay. Then if you have a lot of capital, then that capital or money would form the base of getting in higher and good quality labor, doing more marketing events, thus building other pillars of your leverage. So suppose if you have a lot of money, you are able to market more and suddenly build a brand, gradually build a brand. So you are leveraging one pillar to strengthen the third pillar, which is media or branding. Also, with the help of automation and coding, you can set up systems and processes which help you scale up like anything. So once all these four different leverage factors, when combined properly, would give you immense power. So there are big edtech organizations. However, labor is one of the most common and quite impactful parameters and the leverage factors. So what basically I wanted to say was these are the leverage factors, and the most important of them is labor. So let's say how training can impact and improve the easiest to capitalize leverage factor, which is labor. Training is hard work. Preparing lectures, getting ready to handle all the questions is not easy, even for an experienced manager or a trainee. The effect of training is that you have learned the most from the course. So the maximum effect as a manager to you is that you end up learning the maximum and you really, really become skilled at it. There is an acceleration at the end of the training process when it goes really well. So not only there's an acceleration, there is also an exhilaration wherein you feel extremely happy that you have been able to accelerate the team in the positive direction. Okay. So moving on. Okay, so that's it. I think it was helpful, and let me know in the comments if you think that these helped you and gave you a better understanding of how a senior manager or a senior director can function better. Okay, thank you. Bye.